In Scotland, we have our lochs, both fresh and salty. But we have something else too. Along our coasts, these lochs sometimes have another name. We call them firths. Firths are large bodies of open seawater, and the word firth was once written and pronounced frith, and is said to derive from the Viking word fjord. And fjords, as we all know, are really sea lochs by another name. The Scottish landscape is studded with lochs, over 30,000 of them at the last count. And to appreciate them better, I'm on a loch hopping journey across Scotland, exploring the long fjord-like sea lochs around the coast, crossing the great freshwater lochs of the Highlands and discovering the secrets of the many lochans that stud the open moors. In this programme, I'm exploring the lochs and firths of the northeast of Scotland, uncovering dark mysteries of the past, learning the alchemy of fire and glass, and hearing tales of witchcraft and prophecy. This grand tour is heading for the firths of Sutherland and Easter Ross. My mystical journey starts on the enchanted waters of Loch Ussie, makes its way east along the Cromarty Firth, then continues north to the regal town of Tain and around the Dornoch Firth to a ferry bridge. This is Loch Ussie. On a dull day, it has to be said. It's a modest-sized body of water, which is lucky because I've only got a modest-sized boat. But for such a small loch, it has a mystical association far greater than its mere size would suggest. In the folklore of the Highlands, Loch Ussie is forever bound up with the mysterious figure of Dornoch Oer, otherwise known as the Bran Seer, whose visions of the future rivaled those of Nostradamus for their accuracy. According to legend, the seer was born in the 17th century and worked for much of his life on the Bran estate surrounding this loch, which is why he's known today as the Bran Seer. And it's said that he could see into the future by peering through a hole in an enchanted stone, rather like this one. Oh dear, I think it's going to rain. Sadly, in soggy Scotland, you don't need to have second sight to make an accurate prediction of rain. In an attempt to learn about the man who foresaw more than just the weather, I meet local musician Lauren McCall on the banks of the loch. So you've known the story of Dornoch Oer, the Bran Seer, for a long time.
I grew up hearing about his prophecies from family, from friends, and even at school we learnt about him.
What was it about his life that attracted you?
A lot of the Bran Seer's prophecies are very imagery based. The first one that I came to really was that one day all the hills of Ross shall be strewn with ribbons. And some people take that to mean roads, or it could be electricity pylons, but I think it's a beautiful image.
And it seems to me, I might be wrong, but a lot of the prophecies of the Bran Seer are warnings about the future, about what might happen.
Yes, and a lot of the kind of big disasters of our time he seemed to foresee. Something like Culloden. He stood 100 years before the battle on that very spot and said that blood would be spilled upon the moss.
Lauren's written a whole album inspired by this legendary figure. One track celebrates the loch itself and bears its name, Loch Ussie. But they all seem to be very, very dark, all these predictions, so doom and gloom. Is that reflected in the music that you've written?
I wanted to reflect the ambiguity of his prophecies and the different ways that people can interpret them. They mirror the way that I think about music, that when you hear music it should be interpreted in a different way by every listener, but it's certainly a little bit on the dark side.
Unfortunately, the seer's life ended rather darkly too. He was hurled off a local pier in a burning barrel of tar. Shame he didn't see that coming. From dark water and dark tales, I move on, seeking out water with a positive and healing nature. Just 2 kilometres away, I come to the Victorian spa town of Strathpeffer. One visitor who graced the town with his presence in 1903 was a gentleman called Alistair Crowley. Now today, his name is intimately connected with the dark forces of the occult. Indeed, such was his reputation that he was once known as the wickedest man in the world. Crowley was a complicated soul. He was born in 1875 to Christian fundamentalists. Privately educated and a graduate of Cambridge University, he was also an avid mountaineer and in 1902 climbed higher than anyone else had on K2, the world's second highest mountain. As well as scaling physical heights, Alistair reached new spiritual and sexual highs through his belief in the occult. Now, his occult spirit guides led him to believe that physical pleasure and sexual fulfillment were one of the prime purposes of life. Perhaps understandably, this upset some folk. So what was a man associated with Satanism and sexual depravity doing in Deuce Strathpeffer? Retracing Alistair's footsteps, I meet Arthur Scott on the golf course, the very place where Crowley made a surprising offer of help to a lady in distress. What was Alistair Crowley's connection with Strathpeffer? What was he doing here?
Well, he stayed locally down at Foyers.
On Loch side?
Burleskin House, yes. And he was invited over here by a friend.
And who was his friend?
His friend was Gerald Kelly. He met Gerald's sister, Rose Kelly, while he was here.
It was on the golf course that Alistair discovered that Rose was soon to be subjected to an arranged marriage. Whilst walking on the green, and despite having only known her for a few days, Alistair gallantly proposed a marriage of convenience.
Right, here we go.
Oh dear, the spirit guides are clearly not on my side today.
That was rubbish. So they ended up being a happily married couple.
They did. They seemed to have fallen in love in the course of their honeymoon period, and they conceived 2 children. They lasted 6 years before Alistair got itchy feet and divorced Rose.
It's interesting because Crowley has this reputation of being the beast, doesn't he? The wickedest man in the world. But, you know, in his relationship with Rose, he shows a certain degree of chivalry.
He showed a lot of compassion, I think, towards her, and he was an honourable man, I think, in his own way as well, yes.
Well, let's see if I can complete this game with honour.
Good luck.
I've got my patter.
Having learned of the beast's softer side, I can't help feeling that perhaps Crowley's reputation as a bogeyman is a bit overblown.
Yes!
Well done.
Finally.
From the healing waters of Strathpeffer, I detour south to the Black Isle, where I've heard tell of a strange and mysterious wood. At a place called Munlochy, I venture into a dark tangle of trees and come across a rather unsettling spectacle.
Now, this extraordinary place is the famous Clootie Well, and despite the fact that we're very close to a busy road, there's a strange, mysterious and slightly ominous feel to the place. Now, all the bits of cloth you can see hanging from the trees have been left here by visitors and pilgrims, I suppose you could call them, who've come here to the well.
The well is associated with healing. Believers claim that if you bring a cloth or a clute here that's touched an ailment, when it disintegrates, the illness will fade.
Jess.
Meeting me at this magical place is Jess Smith, a Scottish traveller whose mother, once sought assistance from the spirits of the well.
When I was 6 years of age, I broke my leg, and my mother came here and said, you know, my wee lassie's legs, no healing, you know, could you help? And she had a wee ribbon of black watch tartan, and she brought it here when there was hardly any clothes here, and she tied it to somewhere, and it might just still be here.
Jess's leg did heal, although she thinks it was more likely down to conventional medicine and exercise. But I'm intrigued to hear about a now vanished way of life. Jess gives me an insight into what it was like growing up in a travelling community steeped in traditional beliefs.
We lived in a bus.
You lived in a bus?
Yeah, 7, 8 girls and my parents.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and this is the wee 4-day van that my father had for making his living. He would go around doing his rabbits and moles.
Look at that's great.
Yeah, that's my father. And that's me, age 14. Now, when a traveller girl gets to age 14, her mother makes her an apron. So that's all gone.
Is that your first apron?
That's my first apron.
So that's a big occasion. That's very symbolic.
Yes, that's me
That's you
all
becoming a
growing
woman.
up. That's me becoming a woman.
So you can start cooking and working
I can
in the
start
kitchen.
cooking and washing the dishes.
Well, they're wonderful memories, and I think you must feel quite privileged in a way to have been able to experience that.
It was lovely days. I'm glad I was born when I was, and I lived through those times. I truly am, you know.
Jess's childhood memories are an antidote to the weird Clootie Well, which I have to say I find a bit unnerving. So it's a relief to be back on the trail again. Crossing the Cromarty Bridge, I get my first view of the Cromarty Firth. Today, this arm of the sea is dominated by enormous oil rigs, waiting for an upturn in the fortunes of the North Sea oil industry.
One of the best places to view the full extent of the Cromarty Firth and its stacked oil rigs is a hill called Loch Ussie, which is where I'm heading next.
On the top of the hill stands an unusual folly called the Fyrish Monument. It commemorates the gates of an Indian city defeated in an 18th century colonial battle. But it's really the celebrated view that I'm interested in. From here, you can see all the way to Nig at the entrance to the Firth, which is where I'm off to next. In the 1970s, Nig was synonymous with the booming oil industry. It employed thousands at the famous fabrication yard to build gigantic rigs like those now standing idle in the Firth.
Long before the coming of the oil industry, and longer ago even than the Bran Seer and his predictions, Nig was an important cultural site to the ancient Picts, who dominated this part of Scotland in the early centuries of the first millennium.
Hello, Paul.
Hi, Robert.
At the old
Nice
kirk,
to see you.
Robert Mackenzie introduces me to an outstanding Pictish monument that demonstrates the incredible skill of this early culture.
Wow. Is this it? This is the Nig stone then?
This is it, yeah. Carved in the 8th century.
And the Picts are thought to be responsible for carving this, is that right?
Yeah, and it's a real combination of both Christian artwork and symbolism and the old Pictish symbolism as well.
So those elaborate swirls and the interlaced knots, they're all features of pretty much Celtic Pictish culture.
That's right, yeah.
And what about the top here? What's going on there?
It's St. Paul and St. Anthony, and it's the earliest depiction of the Eucharist in Britain. So you've got a dove bringing down a piece of consecrated bread. You can see that it's got a chip out of it, so that it's broken, representing the broken body of Christ, and it's above a chalice for the consecrated wine.
And it's amazing to think that Pictish culture was largely an illiterate culture.
That's right, yeah.
So this is, I suppose, this speaks the volumes that their volumes couldn't speak because they didn't write.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it probably is one of the most outstanding work of European Christian art that there is, really.
It's amazing to think that this stone has been at Nig for 13 centuries, and I feel privileged to have seen it. leaving the shores of the Cromarty Firth, I make my way north to the town of Tain, on the southern edge of the Dornoch Firth, another long arm of the sea. In 1066, Tain was given a royal charter by the Scottish King Malcolm, making it the oldest royal borough in the whole of Scotland, with over 1,000 years of trading history.
Being a royal borough gave a town like Tain special trading privileges. Now, whilst it was never exactly the Hong Kong of its day, it did have a low tax regime to encourage business.
Sadly, the tax incentives are long gone, but there are still artisans here creating enchanting works of art.
Brodie.
Like medieval apprentices before him, Brodie Nairn has spent years studying the art of using human breath to form molten silica. And I'm really excited to try glass blowing myself.
I thought we'd make a little droplet vase today.
Well, I'm ready, Brodie. What's the first step?
So, this little piece here
Yeah.
is the colour on the end of the blowing iron. Now, this isn't enough glass here to make our little vase, so I'm going to go back into the furnace. I'm going to cover the whole lot in clear glass, and with your help, we're going to block it into a nice round shape. Okay?
Slightly nervous here with anticipation.
I got some nice
Oh,
glass
that
for
looks
you here,
hot,
Paul.
Brodie. That's very hot.
It's 1,120 degrees hot. That's it.
At this temperature, the silica, which in its pure form is sand, and the metal oxides that create the colour become malleable and can be shaped with the same traditional tools that have been used for centuries.
Nice and gently, just turning all by yourself. That's good. Stop there. Let's do a little blow now. Get comfortable. Now, when you're ready, and blowing now. It's nice and steady. That's brilliant. Keep going. Keep going. And stopping. Well done.
Wow. That's centrifugal forces, breath and heat creating this.
That's brilliant.
And incredible skill.
Incredible skill. Now already that is a nice little vase. But let's pull out the top just to see if we can get a little flower shape going. Pick up these tweezers.
Yeah. Here we go.
Pulling it out, nice and gentle, pull it out.
We usually think of glass as an industrial material, but it's also found in nature, when volcanoes spew molten rock or when meteorites impact the Earth. So it's entirely appropriate that this vase is inspired by nature.
Beautiful. And what do you think?
Well,
Look at that. For a first droplet vase, I'd say that's pretty spectacular.
marks out of 10.
10 out of 10, no doubt. Absolutely fantastic.
Right.
Absolutely
For effort.
Persistence. And hot breath.
Hot breath. Well, thank you very much. Not many people have said that to me before. Usually they call me a windbag, but there you go.
I'm pleased that I now know what to give my other half for Christmas. And I leave Tain with my vase and follow the road along the southern shore of the Dornoch Firth. These are treacherous waters. In 1809, the community experienced a catastrophe when an overladen ferry capsized with the loss of 99 lives. Thankfully, getting across the Firth these days is far less hazardous. Thomas Telford designed a bridge here just 3 years after the tragedy, making it a safer journey to my next destination. Loch Migdale is a remote freshwater loch. I have to admit I'm a little apprehensive about the Migdale name, but my worries appear to be unfounded as I enter the miraculously midge-free Fairy Glen, where I meet William Thompson.
Hi, William.
Hello, Paul.
Nice to meet you. Who's this?
This is Ned.
And is Ned going to lead us the way?
He knows the way. We
does,
won't get
doesn't
lost.
he? You've got a very illustrious ancestor who's got a connection with this place. Who was he?
He was Andrew Carnegie, and he was a Scot born in Dunfermline who, at the age of 13, emigrated with his family to the United States.
To the land of opportunity.
To the land of opportunity, and he took full advantage of the opportunities that were offered to him and ended up a very rich man indeed.
Carnegie's life seems to have been touched by magic. As an immigrant employed as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill, he worked hard, invested shrewdly, and became the richest man in the world. Despite realising the American dream, he retained an affection for Scotland and bought the magnificent Skibo Castle and surrounding estate.
And we're on the grounds of the Skibo estate, as it was in those days.
We are indeed, yes.
He had a particular affection for this part of his estate, did he not?
He did indeed. In fact, he built a log cabin here, and it was one of the entertainments to take his guests up here for lunch.
Walking up the enchanting glen, Carnegie's guests would have crisscrossed 9 bridges to get to the cabin. Sadly, little remains today, but I'm hoping to find something tangible to connect me to the great businessman.
So was it up here somewhere?
Yes, just straight ahead from here. You should be seeing it now.
Is that the outline of the old foundations?
Yes, that's the outline of the foundations.
Yeah. You got some old slates from the roof.
Yes.
Did he have many guests up here of note?
I suppose one of the most well-known would be Rudyard Kipling. And he asked Carnegie if he could come to Scotland to finish his novel Kim. So Carnegie lent him a house, and he stayed there with his father and his cousin Philip Burne-Jones, the artist.
And when he was staying here, I understand he had a little bit of difficulty getting the essential supplies to get the old juices, the creative juices flowing.
Oh yes, they did. They ran out of whiskey. So they sent a cartoon drawing to Carnegie showing their distressed condition.
Right.
Without the whiskey. This is it here. And the glasses are empty, and as you can see, they're suffering from lack of whiskey.
Oh, as it looks like.
The fire.
Yes, withdrawal symptoms are setting in.
Definitely.
So was this well received, this
Yes.
emergency call?
Well, it went to Skibo, and Carnegie was very amused by it, and dispatched from a case of whiskey from the Skibo cellars.
A whole case?
Well, it wouldn't be worth sending just a bottle.
Of course not.
So a case was sent across, and he got in return another drawing, which again magically
This
is
was a
here.
receipt for
This was a receipt for it, yes. And this one shows
look at that.
they're quite obviously drunk quite a lot by now. He's put his foot through a picture.
They've been restored.
They've been restored, yes.
It's incredible to think that one of our greatest literary figures, Rudyard Kipling, may have visited this very spot, drunk in the magical atmosphere and its spirit, quite literally. Leaving William, I make my way east, heading to the town that shares its name with the Firth, Dornoch.
Before 1960, a grand way to enter the royal borough of Dornoch was to take the train. But sadly, no more.
Even before the station closed, I'm sure visitors would have been impressed by the town's fine architecture.
The old town of Dornoch boasts some fine and truly venerable buildings. That's the ancient cathedral over here to my left, which stands opposite the site of the once luxurious Bishop's Palace.
But these ancient buildings have witnessed a troubled history, a dark period when a fear of black magic, superstition and ignorance led to unspeakable cruelty.
The most notorious punishment for witchcraft was to be burnt, and the last witch to be burnt in Scotland was executed here in Dornoch, and her name was Janet Horne.
This cruel sentence was carried out in 1727. I meet Dornoch Minister Susan Brown to find out more.
Susan, why was she accused of witchcraft?
She was an elderly person and apparently suffered from what we would call Alzheimer's, and her daughter had a kind of a deformity, so she had a hand that wasn't quite a full hand, and she had some say a problem with her foot as well.
And that aroused the suspicion of the
And
neighbours.
they created this thing that the daughter was being changed into a horse at night, and Mum was riding this horse to do the devil's work.
Right. What happened to Janet after she was accused of witchcraft? Was she taken to trial?
She was indeed. She was tarred and feathered first, and then she paraded through the town, taken out to here, crowds following behind, and then burned at the stake.
So here we are. This is where the dreadful deed was done.
It is indeed.
This stone marks the place where Janet met her painful death. But perhaps her suffering wasn't in vain. Just 9 years later, the terrible punishment for witchcraft was finally abolished in Scotland.
Her name lives on and her story lives on, and the truth of it, which is important.
From the old town of Dornoch and its troubling association with witchcraft, I cross an area of salt marsh and sand dunes, heading to my final mythical destination, Dornoch Point, where the Firth joins the open sea. At low tide, a series of sandbanks can be seen almost stretching across the Firth. These are known as the Gizzen Briggs, or leaky bridges.
The Gizzen Briggs are, well, at least according to local legend, the ruins of a supernatural structure built by the fairies in a task that competes with the labours of Hercules.
The story goes that a clan chief fell in love with a beautiful woman who lived on the other side of the Firth. The chief wanted a bridge built so that he could visit her easily. To do this, he secured the help of an army of fairies, but they were given the wrong command. Instead of building a bridge of stone, they tried to build one of sand, a task they could never complete.
When the wind is high and the tide is low, some people say they can hear voices coming from the Gizzen Briggs as the fairy folk labour at their impossible task, making this a suitably supernatural place for me to end my grand tour from Loch Ussie to Dornoch.
I'm in an area shaped by war and rebellion on my next grand tour as I travel through the wild lands of Moidart.